In the small conservative town of Silver Creek, lawyer Ethan Cooper and teacher Nia Thompson find love, but their relationship faces backlash. As Ethan takes on a controversial case defending local black farmers, the couple is thrust into a fight against deep-rooted prejudice. Tensions rise, threats escalate, and the town divides. Will Ethan and Nia's love survive the mounting pressure? And can they change a town that's resistant to progress? Stick around to find out, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that challenge and inspire. Now, let's dive into Against the Tide. The town of Silver Creek was nestled in the heart of America, a picturesque place where change came slow, and tradition clung to every corner. Ethan Cooper, a local lawyer, had grown up here, knowing every face, every street, and every whispered secret that passed through its cobblestone paths. But despite the town's conservative roots, Ethan had always believed in progress, justice, and equality. It was a typical Thursday evening when Ethan first laid eyes on Nia Thompson. He had been at the town hall, attending a community meeting about educational reforms. Nia, a new schoolteacher, stood in front of the room, speaking with conviction that electrified the air. "We need to start teaching our children about the world they'll actually live in," she said. Her voice was calm but powerful. That means including diverse voices, expanding their understanding beyond what's familiar to them. Ignorance isn't innocence, it's a choice. Ethan was captivated. Nia was new to Silver Creek, having moved from a larger city to take up a teaching position. Her dark brown eyes gleamed with purpose, and her natural curls framed her face, highlighting her graceful confidence. But what truly drew Ethan to her was the fire in her words. She spoke about justice, fairness, and the future of the children she taught with the same passion Ethan reserved for his courtroom battles. As the meeting wrapped up, Ethan found himself walking up to her, his heart pounding a little harder than usual. He wasn't sure why, but he felt drawn to her in a way that was both unexpected and undeniable. "Hi, I'm Ethan Cooper," he said, extending a hand. "I really admired what you said in there. It's not often someone speaks that boldly in this town." Nia smiled warmly and took his hand. "Nia Thompson, I've heard of you, actually. People say you're the town's go-to for tough legal battles." Ethan chuckled, feeling the tension melt away. "I try to fight the good fight. Seems like you're doing the same thing with the kids." "It's important," Nia replied. "If they grow up understanding the world outside Silver Creek, maybe they can make it a better place." They exchanged pleasantries, but there was a lingering connection between them. As the days passed, Ethan found more and more reasons to drop by the school or run into Nia around town. And Nia, who had arrived in Silver Creek feeling like an outsider, began to feel that maybe, just maybe, she could find a place here, not just in the classroom, but in Ethan's world as well. They began dating quietly. A casual coffee here, a walk by the river there. At first, they believed they could keep their budding relationship under wraps. But Silver Creek was small, and nothing stayed secret for long. Ethan and Nia's quiet romance didn't stay quiet for long. Within weeks, the whispers began. Silver Creek had always been a close-knit community, but it was also a place where judgment was passed with a smile, where gossip spread like wildfire over dinner tables and church pews. And while no one said anything to their faces, Ethan and Nia could feel the weight of the town's disapproval. It started with the glances, small, subtle looks from people as they walked down the street together. Ethan had long been a respected figure in the town, a lawyer with a reputation for fighting for the underdog. But now, as he held hands with Nia, the undercurrents of disapproval became palpable. In the local diner, their waitress smiled tightly, barely making eye contact. At the grocery store, older women whispered behind their hands, glancing quickly at Nia before turning away. "Do you think they'll ever accept us?" Nia asked one evening, her voice quiet as they sat by the river. The sun was setting, casting golden light over the water, but the beauty of the scene couldn't ease the tension she felt. "I feel like I'm always being watched, like they're waiting for me to mess up." Ethan reached over and took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Change is slow, but they will come around. We'll show them that love matters more than anything." Nia nodded, though the doubt lingered in her eyes. She had faced prejudice before, subtle and sometimes overt, but something about the scrutiny here in Silver Creek felt heavier, more personal. Maybe it was because she had fallen in love with someone like Ethan, someone who had deep roots in this town. Maybe it was because she had started to believe in the possibility of making a life here, and that made the judgment hurt more. The worst of it came when they were out for dinner one night at Harper's Grill, the local restaurant where everyone gathered on weekends. They were seated near the back, quietly enjoying their meal, when Henry Parker, the town's mayor, walked over to their table. "Ethan, Nia," Henry said with a tight smile, though his eyes remained cold. "It's good to see you two out and about." "Thanks, Henry," Ethan replied, trying to keep the conversation light. "We're just enjoying a night out." Henry's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I've been meaning to talk to you, Ethan. There's a lot of talk going around town. You know how folks here feel about change." Nia stiffened, feeling the weight of his words, but she kept her face neutral. "I'm aware," Ethan said calmly, "but I'm not concerned with what people think. Nia and I care about each other, and that's what matters." Henry's smile faltered. "Well, I just hope you know what you're doing. This town has its traditions, its way of life. You've built a good reputation here, Ethan. I'd hate to see it damaged." The threat was thinly veiled, and Ethan bristled. "Thanks for the concern, Henry, but we're fine." As Henry walked away, Nia let out a long breath. "Is this what it's going to be like? People making it clear we don't belong." Ethan turned to her, his heart heavy with frustration. "I don't care what people think, Nia. We're together because we love each other. If they can't accept that, it's their problem, not ours." Nia smiled softly, though the hurt still lingered. "I just hope it's not something we'll have to fight forever." Ethan knew it was time to take the next step. If he was serious about Nia, and he was more serious than he'd ever been about anyone, he had to introduce her to his family. He had been avoiding it for weeks, dreading what he knew would be an awkward, difficult conversation. His parents, Catherine and David Cooper, were good people, but they had grown up in a different time, a different mindset. And while they loved Ethan dearly, he wasn't sure how they would react to his relationship with Nia. "I think it's time I meet your parents," Nia said one evening, as if reading his mind. Ethan hesitated, his heart racing. "Are you sure it's not going to be easy? They're not exactly progressive." Nia smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I know. But if we're going to be together, we can't avoid this forever. I want to be a part of your life, Ethan. All of it." So, the following Sunday, Ethan invited Nia over to his parents' house for dinner. The Coopers lived in an elegant old home on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that exuded tradition and status. Ethan had always felt a sense of comfort here, but now, as he walked up the front steps with Nia by his side, he felt nothing but tension. Catherine greeted them at the door, her smile polite but strained. "Ethan, Nia, welcome. Come on in." Nia smiled warmly, extending her hand. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Cooper." Catherine hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking Nia's hand. "Of course. Please, make yourselves comfortable." As they sat down for dinner, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Catherine asked Nia about her job, her family, her background, all in a tone that was cordial but distant. David, on the other hand, remained mostly silent, his eyes flicking between Ethan and Nia with a look that was hard to read. "So, Nia," David said finally, his voice calm but probing, "what brings you to Silver Creek? It's not exactly the most diverse place." Nia smiled, though the question stung. "I came here to teach. I believe that education is one of the most powerful ways to create change, and I wanted to be part of that." David nodded, his expression neutral. "I see. And how do you feel about this town? Do you think it's a place where you can fit in?" Ethan tensed, feeling the weight of his father's question. But Nia remained composed. "I think Silver Creek has a lot of potential. Change is hard, but it's necessary. I'm here to help make that change, little by little." The conversation moved on, but the tension lingered. After dinner, as they prepared to leave, Catherine pulled Ethan aside. "She's lovely, Ethan," Catherine said quietly. "But are you sure about this town? It won't be easy for you two." Ethan met his mother's gaze, his voice firm. "I love her, Mom, and I'm willing to face whatever comes with that." Catherine sighed, her expression conflicted. "Just be careful." As they left the house, Nia took Ethan's hand, her grip tight. "Well, that was something." Ethan smiled wryly. "I told you it wouldn't be easy." Nia leaned into him, her heart full of both love and apprehension. "We'll get through it. Together." With the weight of his family's disapproval still heavy on his mind, Ethan found himself thrown into another battle, this one in the courtroom. A group of black farmers in Silver Creek had come to him, desperate for legal help. They were being unfairly pushed off their land by Nathan Harlan, a wealthy landowner with deep ties to the town's elite. The case had started small, but it quickly grew into something much larger, becoming symbolic of the town's ongoing struggle between tradition and progress. Ethan knew that taking the case would make him even more of a target. The town's elite, many of whom sided with Harlan, would not take kindly to Ethan siding with the farmers. But he didn't care. He was a lawyer, and he believed in justice, no matter how unpopular it might be. As the trial began, the courtroom was packed. Ethan could feel the eyes of the town on him, some watching with support, others with contempt. Harlan's legal team, led by Mark Shelby, was ruthless, using every dirty trick they could to discredit the farmers and paint them as incompetent landowners. But Ethan was ready. He had spent weeks preparing his case, and as he stood before the judge and jury, his voice was steady, filled with conviction. He presented evidence of the farmers' rightful ownership, their hard work, and the ways in which Harlan had tried to cheat them out of their land. "This isn't just about land," Ethan said in his closing argument, his eyes sweeping the courtroom. "It's about fairness. It's about justice. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's not easy." The room was silent as Ethan finished, the weight of his words hanging in the air. But outside the courtroom, the town was far from silent. The whispers had grown louder, the judgment more open. People were beginning to turn on Ethan and Nia, no longer content to whisper behind their backs. One evening, as Ethan and Nia walked home from dinner, they found a spray-painted message on the side of Ethan's office building traitor. Nia stared at the word, her heart sinking. "Is this what it's going to be like?" Ethan wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "We'll get through it," he whispered. "Together." But as the tension in Silver Creek continued to rise, both Ethan and Nia knew that the hardest battles were still ahead. Silver Creek had never been a town known for sudden change. Yet, the cracks in its old facade were growing wider with each passing day. Ethan Cooper's decision to defend the black farmers, coupled with his relationship with Nia Thompson, had pushed the town's tolerance to its limit. The whispers that had once followed them like shadows now manifested as outright hostility. Nia could feel it in the way people avoided her in the grocery store, the tight-lipped smiles that carried no warmth, and the way parents began pulling their children from her class. The students, innocent and curious, loved her, but their parents were a different matter. They didn't say it outright, but the message was clear: Nia was no longer welcome. At school, Principal Barbara Lane called Nia into her office. Barbara was a middle-aged woman with a reputation for being fair, but even fairness could be strained by the town's discontent. "Nia," Barbara began, clasping her hands together on the desk, "I've been hearing concerns from some of the parents." Nia's stomach tightened. She'd been expecting this. "Concerns," she echoed. "About what?" Barbara sighed. "They're uncomfortable with the attention you're drawing to yourself. It's no secret that your relationship with Ethan has caused quite a stir. And now with this case he's working on—" Nia's anger flared. "So, I'm being punished for who I'm dating. For standing up for what's right?" Barbara shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not saying that. But parents are withdrawing their children from your class, and the school board is starting to notice. I'm afraid if this continues, we might need to make some adjustments." Adjustments. Nia knew what that meant. It was a polite way of saying they would phase her out. "I see," Nia said, her voice tight. "Is that what you want, Barbara? To get rid of me because I make the town uncomfortable?" Barbara's face softened. "No, Nia, I don't want that. But this town, it's complicated. I just want to avoid a situation where things get out of hand." "They already are out of hand," Nia said, standing. I won't back down because people can't handle change. I'm not going anywhere. As Nia left Barbara's office, she felt a mixture of anger and sadness. How could a place that seemed so idyllic be so resistant to progress? She knew she couldn't let them win, but the weight of their judgment was beginning to crush her. Meanwhile, Ethan was facing his own battle. The trial against Nathan Harlan had intensified, and Harlan's team was using every dirty tactic in the book. They attacked Ethan's credibility, calling him a sympathizer and suggesting that his relationship with Nia clouded his judgment. The courtroom, once a place where Ethan felt in control, now seemed like enemy territory. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling day in court, Ethan walked out of the courthouse to find Sheriff Roy Wallace waiting for him. The sheriff was a broad-shouldered man with a weathered face, someone Ethan had always considered fair. But today, his expression was grim. "Ethan," Roy said, his voice low, "we need to talk." Ethan frowned. "What's going on?" Roy glanced around to make sure no one was listening before speaking. "There's been some talk around town. More than just whispers. People aren't happy with what you're doing, both with Nia and with the case. I've gotten reports of vandalism on the farms, anonymous threats. I need you to be careful." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Threats. What kind of threats? "Letters, phone calls," Roy said. "People saying you should drop the case, that you're causing trouble where it isn't needed. Look, I'm trying to keep a lid on things, but it's getting harder. Folks around here, they don't like change, and they're scared. Scared people do stupid things." Ethan clenched his fists. "I'm not backing down, Roy. Not on this." "I didn't expect you to," Roy replied, a note of respect in his voice. "But just watch your back, okay, and Nia's. I don't want anything happening to either of you." As Roy walked away, Ethan felt the full weight of the situation settle on him. The town was turning against him, not just because of his relationship with Nia, but because he dared to stand up for what was right. The pressure was mounting, and the threats were becoming real. That evening, Ethan returned home to find Nia sitting on the couch, her face drawn with exhaustion. "How was your day?" Ethan asked, though he could already guess the answer. Nia sighed. "Barbara had a talk with me. Parents are pulling their kids from my class. It feels like everything's falling apart." Ethan sat beside her, wrapping his arms around her. "I talked to Roy. He said there have been threats. We need to be careful." Nia leaned into him, her body tense. "How much longer do we have to fight, Ethan? I knew it would be hard, but I didn't think it would be like this. I didn't think they would hate us this much." Ethan pressed his forehead to hers, his heart aching for her. "I don't know how long, but well, get through it. Together." The threats didn't stop. In fact, they escalated. Nia began receiving hate mail at the school, anonymous letters accusing her of trying to change Silver Creek, to bring in outsider ideas. The words were vicious, dripping with prejudice, and they cut deep. The messages weren't just directed at her work, but at her personally, her race, her relationship with Ethan, her very existence in a town that didn't want her. One day, Nia found a particularly cruel note stuffed into her mailbox at home. "You don't belong here," it read. "Go back where you came from." The words felt like knives, stabbing at her already fragile sense of belonging. Nia kept the letter to herself, not wanting to burden Ethan further. But the weight of it sat heavy on her heart. She loved Ethan more than she had ever loved anyone. But how long could they fight against the tide of hatred that threatened to drown them? How long could they stand strong when it felt like the entire town was working to tear them apart? One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table, Nia finally broke. She looked across at Ethan, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Ethan," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "I don't know if I can do this anymore." Ethan's heart dropped. "What do you mean?" Nia wiped her eyes, her hands trembling. "This, all of it. The hate, the judgment, the threats. I love you, Ethan, but I'm exhausted. I feel like I'm fighting a war every day just to be here, just to exist. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to keep going." Ethan reached across the table, taking her hands in his. "Nia, I know it's hard. I feel it too. But we can't let them win. We can't let their hate drive us apart." "I don't want to give up," Nia said, her voice cracking. "But I'm scared, Ethan. What if they never accept us? What if this never gets better? For the first time, Ethan felt a crack in his own resolve. He had always believed that they could weather the storm, that love was stronger than prejudice. But now, looking into Nia's tear-filled eyes, he wasn't sure anymore. The weight of the town's judgment, the constant pressure from all sides, it was starting to wear him down too. But he couldn't lose her. Not Nia. She was everything to him, the light in his life, the reason he fought for justice every day. Ethan stood, moving around the table to kneel in front of Nia. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I love you," he said, his voice steady, despite the fear gnawing at him. "More than anything. And I know this is hard. I know it feels impossible. But I can't imagine my life without you. I won't imagine it." Nia's breath hitched, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "I don't want to lose you either," she whispered. Ethan took a deep breath, his heart pounding. "Then marry me." Nia's eyes widened in shock. "What?" "Marry me," Ethan repeated, his voice firmer now. "Let's stop hiding. Stop pretending that we're not in this together for the long haul. Let's show this town that we're not afraid of them, that we won't back down. If they want to hate us, fine. But we'll stand together. Forever." Nia stared at him, her mind racing. She hadn't been expecting this, certainly not tonight, not in the middle of all the turmoil they were facing. But as she looked into Ethan's eyes, she saw the man she loved, the man who had stood by her through every storm. And in that moment, she knew the answer. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll marry you." The decision to marry was made, but that didn't mean the battle was over. In many ways, it had only just begun. When Ethan and Nia announced their engagement to Ethan's family, the reaction was exactly what they had feared. Catherine Cooper, always the more diplomatic of the two, forced a smile, though her discomfort was clear. "Well," Catherine said, clasping her hands together, "that's unexpected. But if this is what you want, Ethan, well, support you." It was a lie. Ethan could see it in her eyes, in the way she avoided looking at Nia. Catherine didn't support this, not really. She was trying to be kind, to be the good mother. But deep down, she couldn't hide her disappointment. She had hoped that Ethan's relationship with Nia was just a phase, something that would blow over. But now, faced with the reality of their engagement, she didn't know how to handle it. David Cooper, on the other hand, didn't even bother to hide his disapproval. "You're making a mistake," David said bluntly, his voice cold. "This town is never going to accept this, Ethan. You're throwing away everything you've worked for what love?" Ethan bristled, anger flaring in his chest. "I'm not throwing anything away, Dad. Nia and I love each other, and we're going to get married. If you can't accept that, then that's your problem." David's eyes hardened. "You're naive if you think love is going to fix this. You're putting yourself in danger. And her. I know the risks," Ethan said through gritted teeth. "But we're not backing down." David shook his head, standing. "Then I have nothing more to say." As his father walked out of the room, Ethan felt a pang of hurt, but he refused to let it show. He wouldn't let his father's disapproval shake his resolve. He loved Nia, and he wasn't going to let anyone, family or otherwise, stand in the way of that. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Silver Creek. The town, already divided over Ethan's defense of the farmers, now had another scandal to whisper about. Some of Ethan's clients began to withdraw their business, quietly but unmistakably cutting ties. Nia, meanwhile, faced even more hostility at school. Parents continued to pull their children from her class, and the administration grew colder by the day. But not everyone turned against them. Sophia Daniels, the owner of the local cafe, had always been friendly toward Nia and Ethan. One morning, as Nia sat in the cafe sipping her coffee, Sophia came over to her table with a smile. "Mind if I sit?" Sophia asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from Nia. "Of course," Nia said, offering a grateful smile. It had been a long time since she'd felt truly welcome anywhere in town. Sophia sat, folding her hands on the table. "I just wanted to say, I think what you and Ethan are doing is brave. This town isn't easy to change, but I respect you both for standing up for what you believe in." Nia's heart lifted at Sophia's words. "Thank you. It's been harder than I expected." Sophia nodded. "I can imagine. But you're not alone." There are more people than you think who support you. They might not all be as vocal as the ones against you, but we're here." Nia blinked back tears, touched by Sophia's kindness. "That means more than you know." Ethan and Nia's engagement had made them the talk of the town, but it also drew support from unexpected places. In the days following their announcement, a small but growing number of people began to publicly back them. Jake O'Malley, a local mechanic and someone Ethan had gone to high school with, was one of the first to offer his support. Ethan ran into Jake at the gas station one afternoon, and to his surprise, Jake clapped him on the back with a grin. "Hell of a thing you're doing, man," Jake said. "Takes guts to stand up like that. Don't let those idiots get to you." Ethan smiled, grateful for the encouragement. "Thanks, Jake. It's been rough, but we're getting through it." "Good," Jake said, his tone firm. "People around here need to wake up. What you're doing, both with the case and with Nia, it's the right thing." It wasn't just Jake. A group of local business owners, led by Martha Sullivan, a respected figure in town, publicly voiced their support for Ethan and Nia. At a town hall meeting, Martha stood up and gave a heartfelt speech about the importance of acceptance and progress. "This town has been stuck in its ways for too long," Martha said, her voice carrying through the crowded room. "Ethan and Nia are showing us what courage looks like. We should be following their example, not tearing them down." Her words sparked a ripple of applause, and though there were still those in the crowd who glared in disapproval, it was clear that Ethan and Nia had more allies than they had realized. For the first time in weeks, Ethan and Nia felt a glimmer of hope. The tide was beginning to turn, and they weren't alone in their fight. But just as they began to feel like they were making progress, the storm clouds gathered once more. The trial against Nathan Harlan was reaching its climax, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Ethan had been fighting tirelessly on behalf of the farmers, presenting evidence of Harlan's deceit and exploitation. But Harlan's legal team was relentless. They painted the farmers as incompetent, irresponsible, and even accused Ethan of using the case as a platform for his political agenda. The pressure on Ethan was immense. Every day the courtroom was packed with townsfolk, their faces a mix of curiosity and hostility. Ethan could feel their eyes on him as he presented his arguments, as he stood up for the farmers who had been wronged. One afternoon, after a particularly intense cross-examination, Ethan stepped out of the courthouse, exhausted and drained. As he made his way to his car, he noticed a group of men standing by the entrance, watching him with narrowed eyes. One of them, a tall man with a cigarette hanging from his lips, spat on the ground as Ethan passed. "Traitor," the man muttered, just loud enough for Ethan to hear. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He had learned by now that engaging with the town's hostility only made things worse. But inside, the anger burned. The threats continued. Nia came home one evening to find a hateful message spray-painted across the front of their house, "Leave now, or else." It was a turning point. Nia stood in front of the vandalized house, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always known this fight would be hard, but this was something else. "They're trying to scare us," Ethan said, wrapping his arms around her. "But we're not backing down." Nia nodded, though fear gnawed at her insides. She had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. But she couldn't let the town win. Not now. Not after everything they had fought for. As they stood together, staring at the hateful words scrawled across their home, they made a silent promise to each other they would face whatever came their way. Together. The courtroom had become a battleground for more than just the land dispute. It was the stage for a larger fight over justice and the future of Silver Creek. Ethan Cooper stood at the center of it all, his heart pounding as he faced the jury, the town, and, most importantly, Nathan Harlan's powerful legal team. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Nathan Harlan, an influential figure in Silver Creek, had used every weapon in his arsenal to discredit the black farmers and maintain his grip on the land he coveted. Harlan's defense team, led by the shrewd attorney Mark Shelby, had attacked Ethan's character, implying that his relationship with Nia Thompson had compromised his judgment and made him biased. But Ethan wasn't backing down. Standing before the jury, Ethan delivered his closing argument with passion and resolve. His voice echoed through the courtroom, commanding the attention of everyone present. "This case is about more than just land," Ethan began, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the jurors. "It's about fairness. It's about justice. It's about standing up for the people in this town who have been overlooked and silenced for far too long." He paused, letting his words sink in. Nathan Harlan has tried to paint these farmers as incompetent, as undeserving of their land. But the evidence shows the truth. These men and women have worked this land for generations. They have poured their sweat and blood into it. And Nathan Harlan has exploited their vulnerability, using his wealth and influence to try to take what rightfully belongs to them. Ethan felt the weight of the town's gaze on him, but he stood tall. "This isn't just about the farmers," he continued. "This is about who we are as a community. Are we a town that allows the powerful to take from the powerless? Or are we a town that stands up for what's right, even when it's hard? Even when it challenges our way of life?" The room was silent, the air heavy with tension. "I believe we are better than this," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I believe in justice. And I believe that when you walk out of this room, you will do the right thing. Not just for the farmers, but for the future of Silver Creek." With that, Ethan stepped back, his heart racing. He had given everything he had, not just for the farmers, but for the town, for Nia, and for himself. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity. The minutes dragged by as Ethan sat with the farmers, his hands clenched in his lap. Nia was there too, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, her eyes never leaving Ethan. She knew how much this case meant to him and to them. It wasn't just about winning, it was about proving to the town and to themselves that justice could prevail. When the jury finally returned, the tension in the room was palpable. The foreman stood, holding the verdict in his hands. "In the matter of the Cooper case," the foreman said, his voice steady, "we, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiffs, the farmers." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Relief washed over Ethan as the farmers erupted in quiet celebration, tears in their eyes. They had won. Justice had prevailed. But as the celebration unfolded, Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of the work still ahead. The trial had been a victory, but the battle for acceptance, for lasting change, was far from over. The night after the trial should have been a time for celebration, but instead, it turned into a nightmare. Ethan and Nia had barely returned home when Ethan's phone buzzed with an urgent call from Sheriff Roy Wallace. The sheriff's voice was thick with concern. "Ethan," Roy said, "there's been a fire at the school." Nia, who had been standing beside Ethan, froze. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stared at him, the blood draining from her face. "What do you mean, a fire?" Ethan asked, gripping the phone tightly. "Arson," Roy replied grimly. "The fire department's on it, but the damage is bad. I think it was meant to be a message." Ethan's stomach turned. "We're on our way." They arrived at the school to find chaos. Fire trucks surrounded the building, their flashing lights illuminating the night sky. The acrid smell of smoke filled the air, and Nia's heart shattered as she saw her classroom, the place where she had poured her heart and soul into teaching, engulfed in flames. She stood frozen, watching as firefighters worked to control the blaze. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back. This was more than an attack on the school, it was an attack on her, on everything she stood for. Ethan stood beside her, his face tight with anger and disbelief. "They did this because of us," Nia whispered, her voice breaking. "Because of what we represent." Ethan wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "We're not going to let them scare us. They can't win." But Nia wasn't so sure. The fire had been a direct message, a warning that the people behind the threats were willing to go to any lengths to silence them. As she stood there, watching her classroom burn, she wondered if she was strong enough to keep fighting. The arson attack on the school sent shockwaves through Silver Creek. The small town that had once prided itself on its sense of community was now facing an ugly truth. Hatred and fear were tearing it apart. Ethan and Nia knew they couldn't stay silent. The fire had been a direct assault on everything they believed in, and they weren't going to let it pass without action. Together with their allies, including Sophia Daniels and Martha Sullivan, they organized a town hall meeting, inviting the community to come together and confront the divisions that had been simmering beneath the surface for far too long. The town hall was packed. People from all walks of life came, some in support of Ethan and Nia, others out of curiosity, and a few with open hostility in their eyes. Mayor Henry Parker, who had long been a fence-sitter on these issues, sat at the front, his expression unreadable. Ethan and Nia stood together on the stage side by side as Ethan addressed the crowd. "I know this town," Ethan began, his voice steady. "I grew up here. Silver Creek has always been a place where people looked out for one another, where we supported our neighbors. But over the past few months, something has changed. Fear and prejudice have started to take root." He paused, glancing at Nia. "Nia and I are not the cause of this division. We are simply the reflection of the change that is already happening in the world around us. And instead of embracing that change, some in this town have chosen to respond with hate." Nia stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "I came to Silver Creek because I believe in the power of education to make the world a better place. But what I've experienced here, the judgment, the threats, the violence, has made me question whether that's possible." The room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. "But I haven't given up," Nia continued. "I still believe in this town and in the people who live here. I believe that we can be better. But that means confronting our fears, and it means standing up against hatred, no matter where it comes from." A murmur spread through the crowd, and Martha Sullivan stood up, her voice loud and clear. "Nia's right," Martha said, her eyes scanning the room. "We can't let hate define who we are. We need to take a stand, not just for Ethan and Nia, but for the future of this town. It's time we make it clear that Silver Creek is a place of acceptance, not division." Her words were met with applause, and slowly, more and more people began to speak up, sharing their support for Ethan and Nia, and their desire to see the town move forward. But not everyone was convinced. As the meeting wore on, Nathan Harlan stood up, his face red with anger. "This is ridiculous," Harlan spat. "You think a few speeches are going to change this town? You're deluding yourselves. People like you don't belong here, and no amount of talk is going to change that." The room fell silent, the tension thick. But Nia didn't flinch. She met Harlan's gaze head-on, her voice calm but unwavering. "You're right," she said. "Talk alone won't change anything. But we're not just talking, we're standing up for what's right. And that's something you can't take away from us." Harlan scowled, but he didn't respond. The tide had shifted, and he knew it. The town hall meeting marked a turning point in Silver Creek. The fire had been a wake-up call for many, and as the days passed, the atmosphere in the town began to shift. Conversations that had once been whispered behind closed doors were now happening openly, and the divisions that had once seemed insurmountable were starting to heal. Ethan and Nia's relationship had become a symbol of change, of love triumphing over hate, of justice prevailing in the face of fear. And though the road ahead was still long, they knew they weren't walking it alone. Their wedding, held in a small ceremony by the river, was a testament to that. Surrounded by their closest friends and family, including Catherine and David Cooper, who had slowly come to accept Nia as part of their family, Ethan and Nia exchanged vows under a clear blue sky. The ceremony was simple, but it was filled with love and hope for the future. As they stood together, hand in hand, watching the sunset over the water, Nia felt a deep sense of peace. They had fought hard to get here, and though there were still battles to be won, they had proven that love was stronger than fear. "Do you think we made a difference?" Nia asked softly, leaning her head on Ethan's shoulder. Ethan smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "I know we did." In the months that followed, Silver Creek continued to change. The conversations that had begun at the town hall spread, leading to new initiatives in the schools, including the adoption of Nia's proposal for a more inclusive curriculum. The farmers, buoyed by their legal victory, began to rebuild their lives, and the community started to come together in ways it hadn't before. But perhaps the most important change was the one that had happened in the hearts of the people. The hostility and fear that had once defined the town were slowly giving way to understanding and acceptance. And while there were still those who clung to the old ways, they were now in the minority. One evening, as Ethan and Nia walked through the streets of Silver Creek, hand in hand, they passed by the cafe where Sophia Daniels waved at them from behind the counter. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and for the first time in a long while, they felt at peace. "This town's different now," Nia said, her voice filled with quiet wonder. "It is," Ethan agreed, "and we helped make it that way." As they continued their walk, the stars began to twinkle overhead, and the future stretched out before them, filled with challenges. Yes, but also with hope. Together, they had faced the darkness, and together, they had found the light. Though Ethan and Nia's wedding had been a turning point for the town of Silver Creek, it was clear that the battle for acceptance and equality was far from over. In the weeks following their ceremony, small acts of resistance against the new wave of openness continued to surface: petty vandalism, quiet gossip, and the occasional icy glance from the more traditionalist residents. But there was also an undeniable sense of momentum, a growing number of people willing to stand alongside them and push Silver Creek toward a better future. The school where Nia worked had started implementing her proposed curriculum changes, which incorporated a more diverse and inclusive range of perspectives. It was a small but significant victory, one that filled Nia with a sense of purpose. She had worked tirelessly for this moment, but it wasn't without its struggles. One afternoon, as Nia prepared for her history class, Principal Barbara Lane stepped into the classroom. Barbara had always been professional, but her support for Nia had been cautious at best, and Nia could tell that the recent changes at the school had made her uncomfortable. "Nia," Barbara said, her tone measured, "I wanted to check in on how the new curriculum is going. I've had a few parents express concern." Nia, already expecting resistance, smiled politely. "It's going well. The students are engaging with the material, asking good questions. I think it's opening their minds to the world beyond Silver Creek." Barbara nodded but didn't look convinced. "I'm glad to hear that. But some parents are worried that we're pushing too much, too soon. You understand how this town is. People don't like feeling like their way of life is being threatened." Nia sighed internally, choosing her words carefully. "I understand their concerns, but this isn't about threatening anyone's way of life. It's about preparing the students for a world that's changing. If we don't evolve, we risk leaving them unprepared." Barbara frowned, clearly torn between keeping the peace with the more conservative parents and supporting the progressive changes Nia had championed. "Just be mindful, Nia. Change is a delicate process, especially in a place like this." As Barbara left the classroom, Nia sat at her desk, feeling a mix of frustration and determination. The obstacles were still there, but she wasn't going to let them deter her. There was too much at stake too, many young minds relying on her to show them that the world was bigger than the narrow views they'd grown up with. That evening she shared her frustrations with Ethan as they sat together on their porch, watching the sun set over the small town they both called home. "Barbara's still trying to appease the parents who are against the new curriculum," Nia said, leaning against Ethan's shoulder. "I knew this would be hard, but I didn't expect it to feel like I'm walking on eggshells every day." Ethan kissed the top of her head, his arm wrapped around her. "It's a process, Nia. You're making a difference, even if it's slow. The fact that they even implemented the curriculum at all is a win. People will come around, maybe not all of them, but enough." Nia nodded, though the weight of the day still sat heavy on her shoulders. "I hope so. Sometimes it feels like we're moving forward, but other days it feels like nothing's changed at all." Ethan's gaze softened as he looked out at the town. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but we're in this together. We always will be." Nia smiled, taking comfort in his words. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Ethan by her side, she felt a renewed sense of resolve. As the months passed, the tension in Silver Creek became more palpable. The town was shifting, but not without resistance. The younger generation, inspired by the changes they saw in the school and in the town's leadership, began pushing for more openness and acceptance, while the older, more traditionalist residents fought to maintain the status quo. The division became most apparent at the annual Founders' Day Festival, a long-standing Silver Creek tradition. The festival was a celebration of the town's heritage, with parades, food stalls, and speeches from local leaders. But this year, the atmosphere was different. While some embraced the changes Silver Creek was undergoing, others clung to the past, refusing to acknowledge that the town had to evolve. Ethan and Nia attended the festival, knowing full well that their presence would stir mixed reactions. As they walked hand in hand through the crowd, they were met with a combination of warm greetings and cold stares. "I don't think they're used to seeing us together out in public like this," Ethan said with a wry smile, squeezing Nia's hand. Nia chuckled softly. "They better get used to it." As they passed by one of the stalls, Jake O'Malley, the mechanic who had been one of their earliest supporters, waved them over. Ethan Nia Jake called out, his broad grin standing in stark contrast to the tense energy surrounding the festival. "Good to see you both here." "Good to see you too, Jake," Ethan replied, shaking his hand. Jake leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You know, there's been a lot of talk going around. Some folks are still stuck in their old ways, but I've heard a lot of people starting to see things differently. You two are doing more for this town than you realize." Nia smiled, grateful for his support. "Thanks, Jake. It's been a tough few months, but hearing that makes it worth it." Jake nodded, his expression serious. "You keep standing strong. This place is changing, whether some people like it or not." As they continued through the festival, Ethan noticed Nathan Harlan standing near the main stage, his face twisted into a scowl as he watched them. Harlan had never forgiven Ethan for winning the trial, and his bitterness had only deepened with the town's gradual shift toward progress. "Looks like Harlan still hasn't gotten over the verdict," Ethan muttered under his breath, glancing at Nia. "He probably never will," Nia said quietly. "But it doesn't matter. We've already won." Later that afternoon, the festival's main event, the Founders' Day speech, took place on the stage in the town square. Mayor Henry Parker, who had slowly come to embrace the changes sweeping through Silver Creek, was set to deliver a speech about the town's future. "We have a rich history here in Silver Creek," Mayor Parker began, addressing the gathered crowd. "A history built on tradition, hard work, and community. But as we look to the future, we must remember that progress is not a threat to who we are, it's an opportunity to grow, to become better." His words were met with a murmur of approval from some, but Ethan noticed a few disapproving glances from the older crowd. "The values that make Silver Creek strong, kindness, compassion, and fairness, are the same values that will guide us into the future," the mayor continued. "And that future includes everyone, no matter where they come from, no matter what they look like." The applause was polite but muted. It was clear that while the mayor's words resonated with some, there were still many who were resistant to the idea of change. As the festival wound down, Ethan and Nia walked through the town square, reflecting on the day's events. "I think the mayor's speech was a step in the right direction," Nia said, her voice thoughtful. "But there's still so much tension here." Ethan nodded. "It's going to take time. People like Harlan are never going to change, but the younger generation, people like Jake there, ready for something new." They walked in silence for a few moments, taking in the sights and sounds of the festival around them. It was a town divided, but it was also a town in transition. Change was happening slowly but surely. "I just hope we're doing enough," Nia said quietly, her gaze distant. Ethan stopped walking and turned to her, his eyes full of love and determination. "We are. I heard you're heading off to college soon. And we'll keep doing it, together." As the town continued to grapple with its growing pains, Ethan and Nia found themselves at the forefront of a movement they hadn't planned to lead. Their fight for acceptance and equality had inspired others to speak out and act, and Silver Creek was slowly becoming a more inclusive place. One of the most significant changes came when Nia was asked to lead a community outreach program at the school, aimed at fostering understanding and dialogue between the town's residents. The program was designed to bring people from different backgrounds together, encouraging them to share their stories and perspectives in an open and respectful environment. At first, Nia was hesitant. The hostility she had faced in the months after the trial had left her wary of putting herself in the spotlight again. But after talking it over with Ethan, she realized that this was an opportunity to make a real, lasting difference in the town. "I think you should do it," Ethan said one evening as they sat on the porch. the soft hum of cicadas filling the air. "You've already made such a huge impact with the curriculum changes at the school. This is the next step." Nia nodded, though she still felt a flicker of doubt. "What if it doesn't work? What if people don't show up?" Ethan smiled, his hand resting on hers. "They will. People want to change, Nia. They just need someone to show them how." With Ethan's encouragement, Nia agreed to take on the project. Over the next few weeks, she worked tirelessly to organize the program, reaching out to community leaders, local businesses, and residents from all walks of life. The goal was to create a space where people could come together, listen to each other's experiences, and begin to bridge the divide that had long existed in Silver Creek. The first meeting was held in the school's gymnasium, and to Nia's surprise, the turnout was larger than she had expected. People from all parts of the town had come, young and old, black and white, progressive and traditional. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter in this journey. Standing at the front of the room, Nia felt a surge of both excitement and anxiety. This was her chance to help guide the town toward a better future. But she knew that real change wouldn't come easily. "Thank you all for being here," Nia began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "This program is about creating a space where we can listen to each other, learn from each other, and begin to understand the different experiences that shape our lives. We may not always agree, but that doesn't mean we can't work together to build a stronger community." As the meeting progressed, people began to open up, sharing their stories and their struggles. Some spoke about the challenges they had faced growing up in a town that often felt closed off to outsiders. Others, like Martha Sullivan, spoke about the importance of embracing change, even when it was uncomfortable. "I grew up here," Martha said, her voice strong as she addressed the group. "And I'll be the first to admit that I didn't always see the need for change. But watching what Nia and Ethan have done, seeing the way they've stood up for what's right, it's made me realize that this town is capable of so much more than we've given it credit for. We can be better." Her words were met with quiet nods from many in the room, and Nia felt a flicker of hope. Not everyone was convinced, of course. There were still those who clung to the past, who felt threatened by the changes happening around them. Nathan Harlan had made it clear that he would never support the new direction Silver Creek was heading in, and others like him remained vocal in their opposition. But for the first time in a long while, Nia could see that progress was possible. The community outreach program wasn't just about talking, it was about building bridges, about creating connections between people who had once seen each other as strangers or even enemies. As the meeting ended, Nia felt a sense of accomplishment. There was still a long road ahead, but they were moving in the right direction. That evening, as she and Ethan sat together on their porch, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky, Nia allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. "We're getting there," Ethan said softly, his hand intertwined with hers. Nia smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Yeah, we are." Despite the steady progress being made in Silver Creek, there were still moments when Ethan and Nia were reminded of just how deeply entrenched some people's prejudices could be. The community outreach program had been successful in bringing many people together, but as the discussions continued, it became clear that not everyone was on board with the changes. One evening after the fourth community meeting, Nia was walking back to her car when she noticed a group of teenagers loitering near the edge of the parking lot. At first, she didn't think much of it. Teenagers often hung out after events, but as she approached her car, one of them called out to her. "Hey, Miss Thompson," one of the boys said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "You really think you can change this town?" Nia stopped, her heart racing. She turned to face them, keeping her voice calm. "I think change is already happening, and it's for the better." The boy smirked, glancing at his friends. "People like you don't belong here. You and Cooper, you think you're heroes, but you're just making things worse." Nia felt a surge of anger, but she refused to let it show. She had faced this kind of hostility before, and she wasn't going to let a group of teenagers rattle her. "I belong here as much as anyone else," she said firmly. "And so does anyone who's willing to stand up for what's right." The boy's smirk faltered, but before he could respond, a voice rang out from behind Nia. "She's right, you know. Nia turned to see Jake O'Malley approaching, his large frame imposing as he stepped between her and the group of teens. Jake wasn't the kind of man who intimidated easily, and his presence sent a clear message. "You all better get home before you say something you regret," Jake said, his tone low but firm. The teenagers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable under Jake's stern gaze. After a few tense moments, they muttered something under their breath and slunk off into the night. Nia let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Thanks, Jake. He had faced prejudice, yes, but he had also witnessed the strength of community, the power of people standing up for what was right. No problem. I've got your back. As they walked together to their cars, Nia felt a deep sense of gratitude for the allies she and Ethan had found in this town. People like Jake, Martha Sullivan, and Sophia Daniels had shown that Silver Creek wasn't just a place of prejudice. It was a place where good people were willing to stand up for each other, even when it wasn't easy. Later that evening, as she recounted the incident to Ethan, he listened with a quiet intensity. His protective instincts flared, but he knew that Nia was strong, more than capable of standing her ground. "We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore," Nia said as she finished her story. "We're fighting for the people who believe in us, who believe in this town." Ethan nodded, his hand resting on hers. "And we won't stop until it's done." In the months that followed, Silver Creek continued its slow but steady march toward a more inclusive future. The school's new curriculum, which Nia had worked so hard to implement, was making a noticeable impact. The students were more engaged, asking questions about history, diversity, and justice in ways that they hadn't before. Nia could see the change in their eyes, the curiosity, the desire to learn more about the world beyond their small town. One afternoon, as Nia was preparing for her next class, she was approached by Marcus, one of her brightest students. Marcus was a thoughtful boy, always eager to dive into discussions about social issues. "Miss Thompson," Marcus said, his voice hesitant, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, Marcus," Nia replied, smiling at him. "What's on your mind?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the classroom. "My dad, he doesn't like the stuff we're learning in class. He says it's not how things are supposed to be. That people like you and Mr. Cooper are trying to change things too much." Nia's heart sank at the boy's words, but she kept her expression gentle. "What do you think, Marcus?" Marcus frowned, clearly conflicted. "I don't know. I mean, I like learning about all this stuff, but my dad, he says things were better the old way." Nia knelt down so she was eye-level with Marcus, her voice soft but firm. "It's okay to question things, Marcus. Change is hard, and not everyone will agree with it. But it's important to think for yourself. Ask questions, learn as much as you can, and then decide what you believe is right." Marcus nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "Do you think things will ever really change here, Miss Thompson, like, for real?" Nia smiled, though the answer wasn't an easy one. "I think things are already changing. It's slow and it's hard, but every little step forward matters. And people like you, Marcus, you're the ones who will make sure that change keeps happening." Marcus seemed to consider her words for a moment before nodding. "Thanks, Miss Thompson. I'm glad you're my teacher." Nia watched as Marcus returned to his desk, her heart heavy but hopeful. Moments like this reminded her why she had fought so hard for this town, for these kids. They were the future of Silver Creek, and with every lesson she taught, she was helping to shape that future into something better. Meanwhile, Ethan was working on a new case that had caught the attention of the entire town. This time, it wasn't a land dispute, but a discrimination lawsuit brought by one of the town's workers against a major employer. The case was emblematic of the broader struggles that still existed in Silver Creek, issues of inequality, systemic prejudice, and the fight for fair treatment. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that this case wasn't just about one person's fight for justice. It was about the future of the town's workforce, the people who had been overlooked and marginalized for far too long. Ethan, ever the tireless advocate, poured himself into the case, determined to secure justice for his client. The opposition was fierce, as the company in question had deep roots in the town, and many feared that siding with the worker could lead to economic repercussions. But Ethan wasn't swayed by the town's fear. He knew that standing up for what was right was the only way forward, no matter how difficult the road might be. As the trial neared its conclusion, the courtroom was packed once again with townspeople, some there to support Ethan, others there to watch and wait, unsure of which way the tide would turn. In his closing argument, Ethan spoke with the same conviction that had won him the farmer's case months earlier. "This case isn't just about one worker," Ethan said, his voice ringing through the courtroom. "It's about every person in this town who deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. It's about fairness, about doing what's right even when it's hard." He paused, locking eyes with the jury. "We have a chance today to show that Silver Creek is a place where everyone is valued, where justice prevails. Let's not waste that chance." The jury's decision, when it came, was a victory for Ethan's client and for the town as a whole. The verdict sent a clear message: Silver Creek was ready to move forward, to embrace the values of equality and justice that Ethan and Nia had fought so hard for. The victory in the courtroom marked the beginning of a new chapter for Silver Creek. Slowly but surely, the town was becoming a place where people felt safe to speak out, to stand up for what they believed in. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, still pockets of resistance, but the progress was undeniable. Ethan and Nia, though still facing challenges, felt a sense of peace they hadn't known in a long time. They had fought for their love, for justice, and for the future of Silver Creek, and now they were seeing the fruits of their labor. One evening, as they sat together on their porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Ethan turned to Nia, a soft smile on his lips. "You know," he said, his voice filled with affection, "when I first met you, I had no idea how much my life would change." Nia chuckled, resting her head on his shoulder. "You had no idea how much you'd change mine." Ethan wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "We've come so far. Sometimes I still can't believe everything we've been through." Nia nodded, her heart full. "It hasn't been easy, but I wouldn't trade it for anything." As they sat together, the quiet of the evening surrounding them, Nia thought about the journey they had been on, the battles they had fought, the love they had shared, and the future they had helped create. Silver Creek was changing, and so were they. A few weeks later, the community held a town-wide celebration to honor the progress that had been made. The event, organized by Nia and Martha Sullivan, was a way to bring everyone together, to celebrate the town's journey toward inclusion and justice. The celebration was held in the town square, where people from all walks of life gathered, young and old, black and white, conservative and progressive. It was a symbol of how far Silver Creek had come, and a reminder that the town's future was something everyone could help shape. As the sun set over the square, Ethan and Nia stood together on the main stage, looking out at the crowd. The atmosphere was warm and joyful, filled with laughter and music. It was a moment of triumph, a testament to the power of love, community, and perseverance. Martha Sullivan took the microphone, her voice carrying across the square. "Tonight, we're celebrating more than just the progress we've made. We're celebrating the people who made that progress possible. People like Ethan and Nia, who showed us what it means to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." The crowd erupted in applause, and Nia felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. She hadn't done this for recognition, but hearing the town come together in support of the changes they had fought for filled her with a sense of pride and fulfillment. As the night wore on, Ethan and Nia danced together under the stars, surrounded by friends, family, and neighbors. The future, once uncertain, now felt bright with possibility. And though there were still challenges ahead, they knew they would face them together, just as they always had. As the years passed, Silver Creek continued to evolve, becoming a beacon of hope for other towns grappling with the same struggles. Ethan and Nia's love story became part of the town's legacy, a symbol of what could be achieved when people refused to back down in the face of adversity. Their journey wasn't just about love, it was about standing up for justice, for fairness, and for the belief that everyone, no matter their background, deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. In the end, Silver Creek had become a place where people from all walks of life could live, love, and grow. And though the road had been long and hard, It had been worth every step. Ethan and Nia, together, had built a legacy of love and hope, one that would endure for generations to come. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about love, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our latest content. Thanks for your support, and remember, love and justice always prevail. He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the world beyond. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. It was a beautiful day, full of possibility. And as Derek looked out, he felt a deep sense of hope for the future, not just for himself and his family, but for the world they were all helping to shape. Mia and Marcus ran into the room, their laughter filling the air as they played a game of tag around the furniture. Jessica followed close behind, her smile bright and warm. Derek turned away from the window and watched his family, feeling a deep sense of contentment. They were his reason for everything, for standing tall in the face of adversity, for sharing his story, for doing his part to make the world a better place. And as he looked at their faces, full of love and laughter, Derek knew that the future was bright. It wouldn't always be easy, but it was full of potential, full of opportunities to learn, to grow, and to create a world where empathy and understanding prevailed. In the end, that was all he could ask for. As the day wound down, Derek sat back at his desk, reflecting on everything that had transpired over the last few months. From the confrontation at the electronics store to the inspiring conversations with young people, he had witnessed firsthand how one small action could create lasting change. Every step forward mattered. He logged into his blog and drafted another post, this time focusing on the idea of speaking out, of standing up for what's right. He knew there was more work to do, always more people to reach, more stories to tell. But he felt confident that he was on the right path. As Derek prepared to hit publish, he paused, thinking of everyone who had been following his journey. If you've been inspired by this story and want to be part of a community that stands up for empathy, justice, and change, don't forget to subscribe to the blog. Join the conversation, share your thoughts, and stay tuned for more stories about making a difference one step at a time. Together we can build a future that's brighter for everyone. Satisfied, Derek hit the publish button and leaned back in his chair. The work wasn't done, but with every new subscriber, every person who read and connected with his message, he knew they were getting closer to the world they all deserved. And that was worth everything.